Now we'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about some competitors in the marketplace today and a few of their key disadvantages or weaknesses in regards to comparing against the Le Mans RevMaster. In front of me is a Schwinn IC Pro. This bike represents a large percentage of bikes in the marketplace today offered actually by various manufacturers. We're going to take a look at this bike from top down and see how it compares to the Rev. As we spoke of, the RevMaster, and one of the areas it excels is in its fit capabilities. Having micro adjustability both in height and fore and aft on the front and rear of the bike is something that is incredibly important when it comes to enhancing the overall exercise experience. The Schwinn bike in front of me handles its height adjustment with turnout, pull out, what is referred to as pop pin adjustments. These limit the ability to fit the bike in exact micro arenas. The fore-aft on the bike and the saddle is handled the exact same way. Again, it's a turn-out, pull-out adjustment mechanism. And depending upon the height of the person, a person of relatively short stature that has the saddle up front can actually be hindered by this bar sticking out in the back if they choose to throw a leg over to get on that way. When we move to the front of the bike, again, the front of the RevMaster is completely micro-adjustable, both in the height and the fore-aft. This bike, again, has the turnout, pull-out, pop pin adjustments for the height adjustments, and it has no fore-aft. Fore-aft ability on this bike is simply handled by alternate hand positions, some of which are not very comfortable. When we move to the braking mechanism of this bike, the RevMaster has the nice, smooth dial-down adjustment. Simple brake pad on top of flywheel braking mechanism. The braking mechanism here is handled by a caliper style system that has two pads pressing onto the sidewalls of the flywheel. This knob has a tendency to apply pressure very quickly to the bike and adversely takes it off very quickly. To handle the braking needs, they've had to incorporate a larger press down mechanism to safely slow the bike down at speed. The frame of this bike is simply powder coated steel. Again, we go through the process of using ED coating along with powder coat as a protection and corrosion resistance for our frame. Here they're dealing with simply painted steel. The cranks on this bike, they're basically off-the-shelf painted cranks. Again, we use a custom forged crank, very hard, very durable. The drivetrain. Huge separation in bikes in the marketplace is the materials they use for their drivetrain. Here we're using chain. Chain it does require maintenance in the form of greasing. It is prone to stretching and often breaking. We choose to use a very quiet Kevlar braided belt, extremely smooth, extremely quiet. Here you have noise and maintenance. To service the front end of this bike, if you need to remove a chain, you do need to lessen the tension on the flywheel. You have to do that by adjusting it in and out. Once you're back to putting the bike together and in service arenas, when you put a chain back on this bike, you do need to get it tensioned and the flywheel centered properly. Those are just a few of the primary differences between our bikes. The next bike we'd like to take a look at is the Spinner NXT from Star Trek. This bike is a generational move from the direction of the original Spinners. And let's look at some of its primary competitive weaknesses or disadvantages in comparison to the RevMaster. Again, fit. The micro adjustability of the RevMaster is bar none. On this bike, once again, we're limited. The rear end of the bike, again, is done with the screw out, pull out, pop pin adjustments. Limited adjustability to adjust through 19 points, spaces in between. Fore-aft on this bike is handled with a knob, and it actually can slide back and forward. Again, the thing you have to deal with here is the accessibility if you choose to throw your leg over. The adjustability of the front of the bike is not micro. It actually is again handled with screw out, pull out, pop pin adjustments. No fore-aft adjustability on the bars whatsoever, strictly varying hand positions to manage that. The brake assembly is housed in this frame, which is aluminum. Very difficult to get at if you need to access it for service. The crank of this bike, again, forged crank, RevMaster, painted steel crank here. The drivetrain, again, we use a quiet, smooth Kevlar braided belt. Once again, this bike incorporates chain. Chain, as we've spoke of, requires maintenance, requires cleaning, greasing, is prone to stretching, and even breaking. The RevMaster uses a belt to alleviate these needs. The next bike we're going to take a look at is the Kaiser M3. This is a bike in its current incarnation that is essentially a retread of a frame design they've used for many years in the industry. It's a frame design that does not incorporate the general fit characteristics that we find on the RevMaster. Let's take a look at this. The height on this bike is adjusted with screw-out pins. It does have micro adjustability. On the fore-aft, it's very limited in its range. The big thing we run into on this bike is the fact that the frame is essentially a V. As you adjust this bike in either plane, it's moving up and away from each other. The front end, again, screw-out adjustments. But what happens as you move this thing is it's always moving away from you. For those individuals that prefer to ride it in an upright position with their hands closer to them, or possibly even in an arrow position, it's absolutely impossible to do that for many people on this bike. I've seen very short people who can't reach it. I've seen tall people who can't reach it or are uncomfortable in their upright positions. This bike does just not adjust to allow you the freedom to manipulate the fit of the bike whatsoever. Taking a look at the resistance mechanism on this bike, it's a relatively unproven magnetic style system. You basically have a lever attached to a cable, which is prone to stretching, attached to magnets that move closer to or further away from the flywheel to give you resistance. For this to work, you have to use a flywheel that is extraordinarily light. This flywheel weighs approximately 4 pounds. The flywheel on the RevMaster, as an example, weighs 47 pounds. That 47-pound flywheel, combined with our gearing, gives just a wonderful feeling of inertia. It allows you to really power through your exercise, especially under loads. When you load this bike up under heavy load, with such a light flywheel, inertia is non-existent. We've heard it explained and felt it as nothing more than the feeling of cycling through mud or running in sand. It just bogs down under load. It's not a feeling we associate with group cycling. The other thing that happens is because the materials used on this bike, a lot of plastic, some lighter gauge steel, a very light flywheel, this bike is exceptionally light. It weighs approximately 84 pounds. An example, the RevMaster, 154 pounds. It's a bike you can get on and hammer. It feels stable underneath you. This bike, because of its leverage as you move it up and away from you, it has a stability issue that just is not overcomable.